Richard, that was great. Good to see you. You got a pretty serious voice, and you sound good.
I learned from the best. I learned from the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey. Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks. Thank you. Good to see you. Hey, how's it going? Hello, everybody. Please, everybody have a seat. Everybody have a seat. Have a seat. So, what's been going on while I've been gone? It is wonderful to be home. It is wonderful to be at the University of Chicago. It is wonderful to be on the south side of Chicago. And it is wonderful to be with these young people here. And what I want to do is just maybe speak very briefly at the top about why we're here. And then I want to spend most of the time that we're together hearing from these remarkable young people who are, I think, representative of some amazing young people who are in the audience as well. I was telling these guys that it was a little over 30 years ago that I came to Chicago. I was 25 years old, and I had gotten out of college filled with idealism and absolutely certain that somehow I was going to change the world. But I had no idea how or where or what I was going to be doing. And so I worked first to pay off some student loans. And then I went to work at the City Colleges of New York on their Harlem campus with some student organizing. And then there were a group of churches out in the South Side who had come together to try to deal with the steel plants that had closed in the area and the economic devastation that had been taking place, but also the racial tensions and turnover that was happening in these communities. And so they had formed an organization. They hired me as what was called a community organizer. And I did not really know what that meant or how to do it. But I accepted the job. And for the next 3 years, I lived right here in Hyde Park, but I worked further south in communities like Roseland and Auburn Gresham and Augale Gardens and West Pullman. Working class neighborhoods, many of which had changed rapidly from white to black in the late 60s, 70s, and full of wonderful people who were proud of their communities, proud of the steps they had taken to try to move into the middle class, but were also worried about their futures because in some cases their kids weren't doing as well as they had. In some cases, these communities had been badly neglected for a very long time. The distribution of city services were unequal. Schools were underfunded. There was a lack of opportunity. And for 3 years, I tried to do something about it. And I am the first to acknowledge that I did not set the world on fire, nor did I transform these communities in any significant way, although we did some good things. But it did change me. This community gave me a lot more than I was able to give in return, because this community taught me that ordinary people, when working together, can do extraordinary things. This community taught me that everybody has a story to tell that is important. This experience taught me that beneath the surface differences of people, that there were common hopes and common dreams and common aspirations, common values that stitched us together as Americans. And so even though I, after 3 years, left for law school, the lessons that had been taught to me here as an organizer are ones that stayed with me and effectively gave me the foundation for my subsequent political career and the themes that I would talk about as a state legislator and as a U.S. Senator and ultimately as President of the United States. Now, I tell you that history because on the back end now of my presidency, now that it's completed, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about what is the most important thing I can do for my next job. And what I'm convinced of is that although there are all kinds of issues that I care about and all kinds of issues that I intend to work on, the single most important thing I can do is to help in any way I can prepare the next generation of leadership to take up the baton and to take their own crack at changing the world. Because the one thing that I'm absolutely convinced of is that, yes, we confront a whole range of challenges, from economic inequality and lack of opportunity to a criminal justice system that too often is skewed in ways that are unproductive, to climate change, to issues related to violence. All those problems are serious, they're daunting, but they're not insoluble. What is preventing us from tackling them and making more progress really has to do with our politics and our civic life. It has to do with the fact that because of things like political gerrymandering, our parties have moved further and further apart, and it's harder and harder to find common ground. Because of money in politics, special interests dominate the debates in Washington in ways that don't match up with what the broad majority of Americans feel. Because of changes in the media, we now have a situation in which everybody's listening to people who already agree with them and are further and further reinforcing their own realities to the neglect of a common reality that allows us to have a healthy debate and then try to find common ground and actually move solutions forward. And so, when I said in 2004 that there were no red states or blue states, they're the United States of America, that was an aspirational comment, but I think it's, and it's one, by the way, that I still believe, in the sense that when you talk to individuals one-on-one, there's a lot more that people have in common than divides them. But obviously it's not true when it comes to our politics and our civic life. And maybe more pernicious is the fact that people just aren't involved. They get cynical and they give up. And as a consequence, we have some of the lowest voting rates of any advanced democracy, and low participation rates then translate into a further gap between who's governing us and what we believe. The only folks who are going to be able to solve that problem are going to be young people, the next generation. And I have been encouraged everywhere I go in the United States, but also everywhere around the world, to see how sharp and astute and tolerant and thoughtful and entrepreneurial our young people are. a lot more sophisticated than I was at their age. And so the question then becomes, what are the ways in which we can create pathways for them to take leadership, for them to get involved? Are there ways in which we can knock down some of the barriers that are discouraging young people about a life of service? And if there are, I want to work with them to knock down those barriers and to get this next generation in, just to accelerate their move towards leadership. Because if that happens, I think we're going to be just fine. And I end up being incredibly optimistic. So, with that, what I'd like to do is to have our panelists here today each tell us a little bit about themselves. And what I've asked them ahead of time, and I did give them the question ahead of time, I asked them to describe for me what it is that they see among their peers that they think discourages voting, participation, paying attention to some of the issues, getting involved. Or do they have some immediate suggestions of the kinds of things that would get young people more involved and engaged and discover their voices? Once we've gone through the entire panel, then we're just going to open it up and we're going to see how it works. And hopefully it will be interesting. I'll find it interesting. Hopefully you find it interesting. All right? So we're going to start with Kelsey.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone. It is an absolute honor to be here with you all. My name is Kelsey. I'm a senior at Loyola University of Chicago, where I've spent the last 4 years studying marketing with minors in sociology and leadership studies. I've had the pleasure of being very involved on Loyola's campus with a number of different things going on. I'm looking forward to graduating in less than 2 weeks and pursuing my master's in higher education and student affairs. And I think to answer your question, my passion for working with college students does stem from the ability to work with activists and to work with community engagement, and really understanding that college students during that transformative time is the opportunity for students to learn about these important issues and really find their voice. Understanding that we can't just get discouraged when something doesn't go our way immediately, but really being able to work towards that end common goal.
Fantastic. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ramel. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am a U.S. Army veteran. I major in sociology with a minor in legal studies at Roosevelt University. Yeah. I work currently I'm a research assistant at Roosevelt University, focusing on community-based collaborative research projects. We've worked on projects ranging from landlord-tenant issues to youth leadership programs, and currently we're working on a project about the day labor market in Chicago, in the city of Chicago. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. President.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tiffany. I was raised on the south side of Chicago in a low-income household. I graduated valedictorian from Burnside Scholastic Academy and the top 10 from Kenwood Academy. Broncos in the house. I graduated #1 from Chicago State University with my bachelor's in chemistry, and graduated from Chicago State a second time with my doctorate in pharmacy. Thank you. I've currently been a community pharmacy manager on the south side of Chicago, and for the past 3 years, and I'm also author of 10 Tactics to Tackle Studying. It's the guide to elementary school, high school, and undergraduate success.
Okay.
I'm Max, and you can see what they've made me follow now. I have been involved in civic engagement and civic life here at the University of Chicago through the Institute of Politics, which has been an absolute blessing and a fantastic resource to all of us. The summer after my first year here, they gave stipends so that I think the number was 16 of us could go to Des Moines for the summer of 2015 to either work with certain press agencies or with campaigns. And I mean, I think that was a really eye-opening experience in terms of having to campaign directly and how far you can move the needle by moving one vote in the caucus. I'll have more time on this later. I've also been involved on campus with student government and college Republicans.
Fantastic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ayana Watkins. I'm the baby of the panel. I'm currently a senior at Kenwood Academy High School. And throughout my high school career, I've been involved in numerous student-led organizations, multiple sport teams, etc. And outside of high school, I've been involved in a lot of community-based organizations to volunteer my time with the youth as well. And in the fall, I will be attending Paul Quinn College in Dallas, Texas, with multiple scholarships in my name. And I'm also an entrepreneur, I would say, with my own clothing line.
Okay. All right.
Peace and blessings, y'all. My name is Harish Patel, and I live on the northwest side of Chicago. I arrived as a proud immigrant around the age of 14 with my mom and my sister from Gujarat, India, and attended public schools and then went to University of Illinois, Chicago, both for my undergraduate studies and for my master's in urban planning and policy. After graduating, I did become an organizer with somebody in the audience that I want to point out, Rami Nashashibi, who's been a mentor of mine. That experience sort of led me to run for office, and most recently, now I work for New America Chicago, and I'm the deputy director here in Chicago, where we sort of do what we're doing today. We infuse new ideas, new voices in public policy conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. So, as you can see, we have an extraordinary group here of sharp young people. But you also notice that they kind of avoided my question. So, but that's good because it tees up the next segment. And look, in the presidential election, you have maybe half of your peers voting. In midterm elections, about a third of your peers vote. I suspect that if you ask a lot of young people about a wide range of issues, regardless of where they sit ideologically, they would say, yeah, I'm very concerned about the economy, I'm very concerned about foreign policy, I'm very concerned about this or that or the other. But a lot of them feel as if their involvement would not make a difference. It's not worth their time. And in fact, they're discouraged, but feel disempowered. Right? So all of you have already shown yourselves to be willing to get out there and be involved and to make a difference. And I'm curious as to what is it you think that prompted you to get involved in some fashion? And also, when you talk to your friends, what is it that you think is preventing them from doing so that might make a difference? And we don't have to go in order. So if anybody wants to start, I like that in you. Go ahead.
So although I am in high school, a lot of my peers, so I'm a senior, so of course some of my peers were able to vote this year. But overall, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to take courses at Kenwood Academy, Kenwood Academy High School, that involve political science. We take African American studies, etc. But not a lot of schools have that opportunity. So I would say awareness is something that holds a lot of our youth back from getting involved, because I'm privileged. So therefore, I step up and I encourage others to get involved and to have a voice. But I think the youth feel like they don't have a voice. So that plays a huge factor as to why the results are the way they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Do you think that as you were coming up, social studies, civic education, what kids are getting in the classroom would make a difference? Do you think that it would make more of a difference if young people had the opportunities to volunteer with organizations, to engage in community service? What is it you think that would make the biggest difference in young people seeing, you know what, if I volunteer for this organization, I might make a difference in my community, or if I participate on this issue, somebody might hear my voice and it might actually make a difference. What do you think would be most effective in encouraging people?
So I feel like in order to encourage the youth, it involves to have a strong support system behind it to bring the youth up. So for instance, in school, we are taught social studies, but we tend to focus on mathematics, science, English, because that's what we're always brought up on because of tests, exams, etc. So social studies and civic education tends to be pushed to the side. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it should be encouraged in the school systems because majority of our youth are in school, of course. And then from there, build outside programs. Mm-hmm. So, from there,
Yeah, so I
Come on.
Yeah, so I agree with Ayana because since I went to Kenwood too, that was kind of the start of me getting my foot in the door to want to expand and do outside things. I think also funding after-school programs and summer programs because I had 2 to 3 jobs ever since 8th grade every summer because one, you make money, so so that was one, but also that helped my resume, helped me get my feet wet to allow me to see different opportunities, to see if I liked being a counselor, if I wanted to be a cheerleading coach, if I wanted to be a tutor. So just trying different things every summer helped me to kind of hone in as to what I want to do with the rest of my life. And then after school programs too, the funding for that, it helps keep the kids off the streets. So hopefully in Chicago we'll have less violence since they'll have something to do. And then you're also enriching their lives. So in school and after school and also in the summer.
Fantastic. Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Kelsey, I know didn't you work, was it in the Bronx that you worked during the summer? And what prompted you to, first of all, describe what the experience was, and then give us a sense of what inspired you to do something like that.
So I have been blessed at Loyola to be involved with our alternative break immersion program, which is a program that sends students on trips over spring break as well as winter break. So the spring break of my junior year of college I spent in the South Bronx working with an incredible group at an elementary school out there. We took a group of 10 students and we're really there, kind of like a lot of what you all were saying, to enrich those students' lives for the week that we were there. I think what's so unique about the way we run this program at Loyola is we understand the privilege that we have to be welcomed into these communities. We are not there to support them. While we are supporting them, we are there to learn from them, to understand the experiences that these students are having, but really to understand just how wonderful so many of these young elementary school kids are. I remember the principal at Immaculate Conception, which is a school that we were at, coming up to us at the end of the day and said, I hope you all realize that this is the only week out of the year the students get to finger paint because it is too messy with just one teacher in the room. It took having a lot of us there to make sure that they were able to do that. A very simple thing, but really goes to show the impact that young people can have in these communities.
Now, Ramel, you were going to say something, and obviously your service in the military is an example of public service that I think thankfully everybody now appreciates. That wasn't always the case. But what I discovered, obviously, was that once our veterans take off the uniform, and they leave service, sometimes people forget how much talent is there and the need to tap into the amazing young people that have served in our military so that they can work in the community and continue the leadership that they've shown while they were in the military. You've been able to make that transition, but talk a little bit about your mindset both when you went into the military and after you left. How did that change your perception in terms of your responsibilities to your community and how you might be able to make a difference.
Well, when I joined the military, I joined 6 months out of high school. I was working full-time. I wasn't in school. I wasn't in college where I come from. Being in college is a big deal. Graduating is an even bigger deal. But it's all about graduate high school, you know, get a job, do stuff like that. And I was in the military, and I realized there's so much more to that. And that I am being afforded this wonderful opportunity to engage with so many different people from all over the country, have so many different views, but we all share the same purpose, same goal. And I realized that if I wanted to make a larger contribution, I was going to have to go to school. And so that's what I did. I served my initial contract. I received the honorable discharge March 2014. I moved to Chicago June 2014. I was in Roosevelt August 2014. And I didn't do it by myself. When I got out of the military, I was part of this program called Veterans Upward Bound. And it's a pre-college readiness program for veterans that need to brush up on their academic skills before they enter college. And that being a part of that literally saved me taking extra courses, remedial courses. So I benefited immensely from that. And I was fortunate enough to get a research assistant position at Roosevelt, and that really got me going, because I was working with different projects, youth, landlords. I mean, it was amazing, because like these are regular folks, and that's something I definitely wanted to get involved in. And to answer your question about what I think is preventing youth, I believe that what we need to do, I believe that we need to connect personal problems with like public issues. I feel like sometimes, you know, you're working 2 jobs and you can't afford daycare. It's not because you're lazy. So if we can establish some sort of connection, demonstrate some sort of connection, and I'm really big on like collecting data and numbers, and listen, 80% of people are experiencing this in your community, and you just don't know it yet. You don't see it, but here's the numbers, here are the facts. So I believe that is a huge thing that we can do to help that.
Well, look, you're making a terrific point. One of the things that I learned when I was organizing, and this is true for, I think, a lot of young would-be do-gooders. You know, you show up in a neighborhood and your initial instinct is to tell people what they should be interested in. Instead of spending the first 6 months listening and finding out what they actually are interested in, and then connecting, connecting their immediate needs to the policies that are having influence on those areas of concern. And the more that you can make concrete for people, the fact that the reason there aren't enough after-school programs is not just because they're impossible to set up, but have to do with budget. And here are the people who are making the decisions about the budgets. And the reason that there's a lack of child care is not because you're the only single mom who needs child care. Everybody needs child care, but there aren't enough facilities in place with trained child care providers, and this is what a change in public policy could do to provide everybody support. That's when you start bringing people together and their voices are amplified. Because what's certainly true is one voice by itself rarely changes something. 2 voices have a better shot. 20 voices? Okay, we're getting somewhere. But it begins with that listening process that you're talking about, so that people feel like they're being heard at the outset. So I think that's a great point. Now, Max, were you somebody who was always interested in politics generally, or is this something that kind of came to you? And since you're you've been active in college Republicans. Two questions around that. Number one, do you feel as if on college campuses sometimes you're not heard as much as you'd like to be? And because I think there's certainly a perception sometimes among young people who are on the more conservative end of the spectrum that colleges are a bastion of political correctness, and how do you sort of sort through that? But also, have you found ways in which you can connect and have a conversation with the college Democrat and the person who has a different point of view, so that we can encourage better conversations and better understanding and hopefully more progress?
Yeah, so I think being interested in politics, I don't know that I came from a particularly politically active family. My mother was involved in the PTA when I was a child, right. And that... PTA
is big.
It's real.
PTA is a lot of work. Y'all have,
I mean, in Connecticut, it is blood sport, but that's... I think the message that something like that would send is, she didn't need to do that.
Right.
She did that because the educational system and more broadly the community that was fostered in the town was important to her and something worth giving her time to and something worth, going out and, because no one pays you to do this and you take a great deal of flack. So I certainly honor that commitment. And I think, in 8th grade, which was your first election, mm-hmm. we, in social studies, were told...
Can I just say... I'm old. But please continue. In 8th grade. Go ahead.
In 8th grade, we were... All right, I'll pick a different age to be. We each at the beginning of the year picked a campaign to follow, sort of through to fruition. And each week we did a report for our teacher on how the candidate had been featured in the news, any sort of polling information that we had accumulated. We never got them back, but it was an interesting process in that it taught us to care about the news in a time when, maybe that wasn't something that you went home and watched. Right. And it was something that made you more cognizant of the issues. I was fortunate enough to go to high school in New Hampshire where we're pandered to immensely heavily. And, even it's just part of the whole ethos that every 4 years they care. But or that people care about what New Hampshire has to say. And I think that one of the things that is a shame in that process is that there is a group that is active every 4 years because they're influential, they're big in the towns they're from, but you said don't boo vote, but don't boo act might be more apt, because you have a lot of these people who engage with the process only every 4 years and then are sort of gone for the in-between period. Mm-hmm. And then you have some who, if you're brought up that way and you're brought up to believe that your opinion's going to count for something, then go on to do big things. I had a friend whom I went to high school with, and she's been from New Hampshire her whole life. She's, I think, 20 now, and she's a state rep. Because, she ran for an open seat, and that's just how it goes up there. There's a commitment. In terms of being involved in politics, I was fortunate enough to take a year between high school and college, and I worked in Washington, D.C. in the Senate. And that's an eye-opening experience because it forces you to confront in a real way what you believe and why, and you gain a lot of information very, very quickly. I'm immensely grateful to Kelly Ayotte for the opportunity. And then, after coming here, that sort of changed my worldview. I thought I would come here and be an economist, like I think every first year believes at some level here. And that, coupled with my time at the Institute of Politics, which was a good structured force to show that, there were many, many venues for us to engage civically. Let me explore things like campaigning in Iowa. Now, as for being a Republican on a college campus, yesterday, NBC ran an article about this on their website, and it didn't say who we were, it just said the composition was one Republican and the rest were Democrats or progressives. And I had maybe 3 people send me the article and say, is it you? And it is if you're watching. But I would say it depends on the setting whether it's something I'm particularly forthcoming with. At the Institute of Politics itself, I think most people know at this point, and certainly in the beginning of 2016 when caucus season was going on, those of us who'd been in Iowa and could do caucus math, which is, as you know, not real math, but that made you a hot commodity in the room when you would watch the votes tally. But there were venues certainly where I wouldn't have brought it up or wouldn't have been particularly forthcoming with it. I think people suspected it, but I didn't. I'll leave that to the other student government people in the room to confirm or not. But I don't necessarily know what I was afraid of, but I think that there's a sense that if you harbor a view that doesn't jive with the majority view, that you can expect some level of ostracization from certain people, or you can expect people to assume the worst aspects of you based on beliefs you may or may not hold, right? I don't think anyone sitting in this room agrees with their party on 100% of issues 100% of the time for 100% of the people in their party. Mm-hmm. I might be wrong, but if you raise your hand, I can't see you. Right. Yeah. And so I think that being a Republican on a college campus is in and of itself a sort of honor, because most people don't agree with you, and when you engage in the dorms and in the dining halls, and with those people who are able to see you, the person, and then you, the person with the political views, you're forced to know yourself well and to do soul searching well, and to understand why it is that you think what you think, and what parts of your past impact what you believe now and might believe tomorrow. I think the other thing is there's a significant empathy gap, not just here but everywhere. I think most people haven't had in their homes for dinner, in a real way, somebody who is significantly different from them, either politically or racially or for whatever reason. We've cloistered ourselves. And so I think that the liberal bastion aspect of college campuses certainly can be true. I've been, lucky here. The school's certainly committed to accepting, our thoughts. But I think a broader societal problem is that as we, if you look at the county map of 2016, you had, a lot of counties where, Secretary Clinton won over 80% of the vote, and the inverse was true for the president now. But and there's not understanding, we're not talking, it's not just that we're reading different news, but it's that we don't talk to each other anymore. And I think, it would be good, civic engagement at some point will require a level of civility, I think. There's a lot of problems with our politics.
That's great.
There's a lot of problems with our politics that begin at home. I think we blame intransigent politicians a lot for the failure of each of us to grasp each other well. So your mentor when you were a new senator, Dick Lugar,
great guy, love that guy,
and ultimately lost his primary for that reason.
Because he talked to me.
Yeah, because people couldn't stand to see their member, bridge a gap on a human level.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad. I think there's both an empathy gap, and also I think a lot of people see politics, especially in this generation, and they say, this is ugly, this is mean, this is something that you have, pretty experienced people doing. And, if the country's a ship and politicians are sailors, maybe the boat moves like a degree either way. But I think the lack of results stems from a lack of us understanding each other well. Mm-hmm. I think, Marco Rubio said it pretty well a couple months ago, that you can't really run a country when half of it hates the other. And somehow we're going to have to find ways to bridge that and to meet people who aren't like us.
Good. Terrific. Rich, on this stage, other than me, I guess you're the other guy who's run for office.
The oldest.
Well, I wasn't going to say you're the oldest, but I was going to say you're the other guy who ran for office, and I know you lost, but I did too once. right here in this community.
I got some great too. From
Yeah, there you go. But what prompted you to run for office, which is a different kind of engagement, and what did you take from the experience? Did you feel discouraged by it? Did you feel like, okay, this was fun, or if it wasn't fun, then it was worth it, and you would encourage other young people to take their shot? Tell me a little bit about your thought process there.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I want to sort of start with the first time I ever did something that is considered civically engaged. I was an immigrant, so I couldn't vote until after Iraq War had already started. But the first thing I ever thought I'm doing that's like for this country was actually protesting the Iraq War, because I felt passionately that we were in the wrong side of history there. I think you were also at that point on that side.
I agreed with you at the time.
But so I couldn't vote, but I felt like a lot of the times civic engagement in its sense gets stuck in the dynamic of voting or electoral engagement and doesn't always expand. I think we have to sort of expand it to maybe what your mother did, or being on a board of a nonprofit, or these are tough positions to have, or it's a lot of work there. And I think I would hope moving forward we're sort of thinking about civic engagement beyond voting. But to directly answer the question around why I went from protesting to working at a nonprofit and organizing to thinking about, electoral politics is one of the many routes that I'm going to engage in. And that happened, for me, actually happened in 2010. It was after I've done organizing that I saw that a lot of the jargon that was used against us as young people at that time, I didn't understand. So that's why I went back to college and understand some public policy language. When I ran, it was too, I don't have, my last name is Patel. There's not a lot of Patels in office. I just feel like.
A lot of Patels in India, though.
Oh, there's a lot.
I'm just saying there are a lot more Patels than there are Obamas. I want to be clear.
Agreed. There are. I had a Hussein joke, but I'm not going to make it. So at some point I sort of felt that both, or more than, I don't want to get stuck in this two-party sort of language, but there's a lot of different cult of personalities of cult of politics that young people especially, get sort of drawn to, and they can't really go beyond the questions they're allowed to ask within. And so I wanted to be able to protest and be able to run for office and run a small business and do the organizing and be able to figure out which is the most effective way that I want to, live my life and be happy, but also sort of inspire a whole generation of folks that maybe look like me or come from a Muslim background or South Asian immigrants. Or I want them to, and most young people of color, to feel that they can literally do anything. So that was one of the major reasons. Also, Illinois has an establishment politics that is really old. Not old in age, but old in thinking. And there's a monopoly of power, money, ideas that only come from few families or sometime a few zip codes. And I wanted to say that it's not how we should move forward.
Good. Well, I think that's terrific. Couple of thoughts based on some of the things that folks have said. First of all, what you said, Harish, about there are a lot of different ways to engage, I think is important, because sometimes people think if you're not running for office or it's not election day, there's no other ways of getting involved. And the PTA is a perfect example of the kind of thing that we want to encourage. There are a bunch of writers out there and social scientists and thinkers that would argue that one of the problems that we have with our politics right now is that the mediating institutions, the unions, the churches, the PTA groups, the Rotary Club, a lot of the voluntary organizations that used to exist, black sororities and fraternities, and that used to bring people in together to then work on issues, that those have declined. And the statistics show that people are less likely to be involved with various organizations in their community than they used to be. And what that means is then people don't have some of the same habits of being together on a common project that they used to. We've become a more individualistic society. And that, I think, has some spillover effects when it comes to both political participation, but also in terms of empathy, because you're interacting with fewer people on a regular basis. The second thing, though, has to do with how we get information. So I want to throw this out and see what people think. I think a lot of us who have been in politics for a while do see a change from 20 years ago, certainly 30 years ago, where it used to be everybody kind of had the same information, and we had different opinions about it, but there was a common baseline of facts, and that the internet in some ways has accelerated this sense of people having entirely separate conversations. And if this generation is getting all of its information through its phones, that you really don't have to confront people who have a different opinion or have a different experience or a different outlook. You know, if you're liberal, then you're on MSNBC, and conservative, you're on Fox News. Or you're reading Wall Street Journal, or you're reading the New York Times, or whatever your choices are. Or maybe you're just looking at cat videos, which is fine. One question I have for all of you is, how do you guys get your information about the news and what's happening out there? And are there ways in which you think we could do a better job of creating a common conversation now that you've got 600 cable stations and you've got all these different news outlets that basically are offering one set of opinions? And if there are two sets of opinions, then they're just yelling at each other, so you don't get a sense that there's actual conversation going on. And the internet's worse, right? It's become more and more polarized. How much do you think that affects how people think about issues, and are there ways that could be changed, given that most of your information, and certainly for the younger people coming up behind you even more, they're getting their information primarily off their phones? So, Ayanna?
I think social media has its pros and its cons in situations like this. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, when it comes to gaining information about what's going on in the world, it's way faster on social media than it is on a newscast.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can be a downfall, because what if you're passing the wrong information, or the information isn't presented in a way it should be? So that causes a clash in our generation, and I think it should go back to the old school, which
no phones.
I think phones, social media should be eliminated, because the younger wait. I think I should rephrase myself. I think when it comes to politics and important information that can influence younger generations, it should be organic. So politicians should actually reach out and actually physically talk to the community. So it can't be any misconception on the information being passed. Mm-hmm. Because social media, going to Twitter or Facebook, anybody can hack your social media page. That causes a lot of problems. And to actually go out to the community would feel more welcomed. And I think that goes back to actually getting involved, because to have somebody shake your hand and to actually look at you and talk to you, it's a more heartfelt feeling to actually listen to what that person has to say.
That's interesting. What, Kelsey, you
I
got
think
something to say?
one of the other things you bring up, and you said it almost exactly what I was thinking, is sort of going back to the basics and really having those in-person conversations. I think one of the things that I see the most important is people being able to listen to understand rather than to listen to respond. There doesn't always have to be an immediate response. Let's understand where both viewpoints are coming from.
Yeah, I learned
how we can...
that in marriage, by the way. Just a tip for you young people. Listening to understand rather than listening to respond. That will save you a lot of heartache and grief. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Just a little tip there.
No, but I think it's just something that our generation, we find it easier to hide behind Facebook screens, behind Twitter, between Instagram posts, but really being able to have those in-person conversations and to listen to the other side is the only way at the end of the day we're ever going to get anything done.
Good.
I think it's important to engage with the leaders of that community, and instead of going in there and thinking you, because it affects you in another city, doesn't mean it's going to be the same dynamics in this neighborhood. And I think it's important to understand that I want to help, but I also need to be humble and listen to people that have lived through it and have more of a clear understanding of what's needed. Dialogue is important. Deliberation is important. I mean, you need to critically analyze people's views. And then you can, create a plan off of that. I definitely think, as far as like where you get your news from, diversity is important. Not every news station that leans Republican is horrible. It's nice to, you need to understand how the other side thinks. But yeah, I really believe that not shunning other people that have different views than you, recognizing that yes, you do want to help, but respect the fact that there are people that have been here longer than you that have lived through these issues, and you need to work with them instead of outsourcing their help and stuff.
Any other thoughts? Max, you got something to say on this?
So I think there was an interesting, it was either in the Journal or the Times shortly before the election that showed they made a generic Republican Facebook page and a generic Democrat Facebook page, and they showed you the news articles that would be on their in their news feed that they could go and see. And the fact of the case that we now live in a there's rumors that we just don't have facts anymore in society. I'm in an interesting linguistics class here now called Truth, and the first class they played us an Errol Morris documentary with the man who was a defense attorney in the Bronx during the 70s, and he'll tell you that if you ask somebody what shape a table is, you can get three answers. If you're sitting at the table, it's probably a rectangle. If you're underneath it, who knows? It's the ceiling. And then if you're looking at it right from the side, it's got a rounded edge, so clearly it's a semicircle. And I think that's basically where we are with the news. I don't know if the coverage were of the same issues that people would find factual difference anyway. I think part of the problem is that we don't agree on what the issues are that are pressing and facing the country. And I don't know how you get there, but I don't think that a national dialogue necessarily starts online or starts in the press. I think it starts door to door, and maybe that's in how people go about campaigning, in that right now it's easy to sort of know you have numbers if you can only get them to show up, and there is no onus to work to get somebody else to turn out for you to persuade them that your point of view is correct. Instead, there's a broad incentive to spend millions of dollars in advertisements saying that if my opponent is elected, the apocalypse will occur, rivers will run red, and Hawaii will sink. And I mean, again, if the ship only moves 1 degree, there's got to be a lot in that 1 degree to make all those things happen. But I think that, at all levels, there has to sort of be a civic conversation, and people have to be willing to talk to each other again. I don't know if that starts, maybe it does start in middle school, where you see in a class who has differing views, and then commit part of social studies time to have people talk through issues of the day and why they think what they think. But we have to get back to a place, I think, where people can talk to each other again.
Well, that's been a running theme, and I will say this: The reason I was able to run for the United States Senate was because in addition to my base here in Chicago, I had spent a lot of time traveling around the state. And over time, I got to know people in parts of Illinois that would today be considered red. And I lucked out effectively that I was kind of under the radar screen, so political ads didn't characterize me. And people would meet me, even though I'm this Chicago lawyer from a liberal district with an Arab-sounding name, and but I'd show up, and then you'd have a conversation, and you'd talk about their kids and basketball and what was happening on their jobs, and people got a sense that my frames of reference and my values were not so different from theirs. And that gave me the ability to break through some of the assumptions that people might have otherwise had. And in some ways, Iowa was the same way. I'm traveling around the state, as you know from having worked there. It's retail politics. You're going door to door. You're just talking to people. And we didn't have a huge amount of money, particularly initially, for TV ads. So it was just meeting people. And that does change people's assumptions when they get a chance to know somebody directly. So part of what we're going to have to figure out is how do we create greater opportunities. Now, that's true between red parts of the state and blue parts of the state. It's true even within the city of Chicago. I was yesterday with a group of young men who are part of a program designed to give them opportunities and pathways away from violence and crime. And these are some young people from 18 to 24. All were African American except one who was Latino. Many of whom had already prison records and had done some pretty rough stuff. Several of whom had already been shot, in some cases multiple times. None of whom had grown up with fathers. Many of whom had effectively been orphaned when they were very young. And so this would be the stereotypical profile of somebody who has a good likelihood of shooting or getting shot here in Chicago as part of the violence that has been plaguing the city. And what was striking when you sat down with these guys was they're young people. And if you had listened to them talking, you would recognize them as not that different from any other young man 18 to 24. What was different was their circumstances. They had grown up, in some cases, in foster care, or their mother was a drug addict, and they had been neglected. And so even within the city boundaries, a lot of times we will characterize our neighbors as something entirely different than us, that we can't understand and that we're afraid of and that we can't communicate with, and political rhetoric reinforces that. And they need to be heard too. And because if the six of you had been in that conversation, you would have come away not saying, oh, these are some thugs or super predators that I can't relate to. You'd actually say, man, if I had gone through what they went through, I'm not sure how things would have worked out for me either. And that creation of empathy then promises a different kind of civic response and political response than the one that so often we have. So that hearing other people, I think, is vital. And the question is, are there ways in which we can create opportunities to do that for more young people earlier on, before the lines of division start hardening? But Tiffany, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so just to add on to this about you being in the community and what Ayanna said about meeting the officials, I actually met you before in high school.
Is this another story about how old I am?
No. No, but I was singing with Kenwood Academy Concert Choir.
Mm-hmm.
We were at a breakfast downtown. I actually walked up to one official and tapped him because I recognized him being on TV, and he just put his finger up to me and said, no, he can't talk to me right now. And then I saw you, and I tapped you, hi, Mr. Obama, can I please take a picture with you? And you said no. And I was like, what's going on? They say on TV they care about people, and then in person they don't want to talk to me. But you said, no, not until you tell me your name first. And you shook my hand. Yes.
Just saying.
And you shook my hand and you talked to me a little bit, and all of that helped inspire me too, that he's not just a face on TV. You know what Ayanna was saying, they may shake your hand in public, but then you don't feel connected.
Right.
So that helped me too, wanting to be involved and listen to what you had to say, because I did feel that you cared about someone, a little black girl from Chicago like me. And then going back to what Max was saying, in pharmacy school, they did show us different bills, and we actually went for pharmacy week and lobbied in Springfield. So the school, Chicago State, actually did instill in us how important it was to fight for our rights, because if I'm going to school to be a pharmacist, you never know, they may take away that I can't dispense drugs anymore, and I had no say in it. So I do think what Max was saying, as to bringing it into the schools, will be very beneficial.
Excellent. All right. Well, I suspect, I'm a little out of practice, so I didn't check to find out how long we were supposed to be here. But I'm having fun. Where's the staff person? How long are we supposed to be here? Huh? So what I was thinking is that I've been asking a lot of questions. I should give you guys an opportunity to ask me a couple of questions before time is up. So anybody want to take a shot? Well, no, not you. We're talking to young people, though, but it's great to see you. I didn't mean to imply that you're not young, but I'm just saying. Go ahead.
So I definitely have a question, and it's I've been working on this project with a Latino. It's called Latino Youth on the northwest side of Chicago, and we have been working on surveying day laborers on the corners where they search for work. And I started in September, and initially it was difficult because, again, I was never a day laborer.
Right.
I went with an organizer from Latino Union, so it definitely helped, a nice icebreaker.
Right.
He understood the dynamics of the corner. And after November, it was extremely difficult to talk to these men. And I already had conducted almost, let's say 20 surveys up until then, and then I continued until March. But between November and March, it was just the presence of me being out there with a clipboard was
made them nervous.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to them in Spanish. I was explaining why I'm there, but because of everything that was going on, it was almost as like, okay, yeah, but you're just one person. And so my question to you, Mr. President, is how could you bring these people, not like me, I want to engage with them,
right,
and I'm doing what I can, but how can I tell these men and women that they're to come out of the shadows, because they're already in the shadows, now they're in the shadows even further, and how can I tell them that it's okay to tell me your working conditions and nothing's going to happen to you?
Well, you in some ways you already answered your own question. This is a matter of trust. And so for you to finish your research project, you're going to need somebody that they trust to introduce you to them. And one of the things that I learned as an organizer and then as a politician is your ability to create trust and relationships is the thing that makes all the difference in being able to have an impact. And that's hard to do in this current environment, but it's not impossible. So it may be their priest, it may be somebody that they've worked with that you know, whose legal status is less at risk. I think generally speaking, immigration is a good example of an issue that stirs up so much passion and sometimes misinformation that it's hard for us to have a good, healthy conversation about it. The interesting thing is, historically, when you look at surveys, the overwhelming majority of Americans believe that America is a nation of immigrants and that immigration has contributed to the wealth and prosperity and dynamism of the country. The majority of Americans also believe that immigration should be lawful and orderly, that it shouldn't be haphazard. And so sometimes they feel frustrated if it is perceived that folks are breaking the rules or cutting the line, essentially. And so I think it's important for those who support, as I do, immigration reform and pathways to citizenship for folks who are here, not to assume that everybody who has trouble with the current immigration system is automatically racist. That's an example of us being able to listen. I think for those who are concerned about undocumented workers coming in, whether it's across the border or more typically these days overstaying visas, it's important for them to also appreciate the degree to which these are overwhelmingly families who are just looking for a better life for their children. And I always used to say, sometimes in crowds where folks didn't want to hear it, that it's not like everybody in Ellis Island had all their papers straight. The truth is, the history of our immigration system has always been a little bit haphazard, a little bit loose, a little bit determined by did the country want more workers, economic imperatives. Sometimes it was driven by biases. If you look at what were said about Irish when they were coming here in the wake of the potato famine, they talked about them the same way that you hear people talking about immigrants today. And this is an example of where